Welcome back, guys. The Ordeal of Reconstruction, Lesson 1. My name is Dr. Chris Erskine, and we're going to talk today about rebuilding the United States after the Civil War is over. Now, you've read in your book, you've studied the Civil War, and we've had several lessons, video lessons on the Civil War. So you know, looking at this first slide, you know that Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865. Someone came into the back of a theater where he was watching a play and they shot him in the head, just not very far away. But you also know that only 5 days before that was the end, basically the end of the war. Robert E. Lee surrenders in the town of Appomattox, and the war is basically over. The war's over, and President Lincoln is dead. We now have a new president, President Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson is a Democrat, and people in the South are Democrats. Andrew Johnson is from Tennessee. Tennessee was part of the Confederacy. Andrew Johnson also owned slaves. The South owned slaves. The war was about slavery. How do you think it's going to work, having a president of the United States that had sympathies with people in the South? Well, it doesn't work very well. So here's a question for you, and this is a question I want you to really think about. If we look at the next slide, it says Reconstruction. Here's the question. This is written by someone at the time, as soon as the war ended. His name was John Greenleaf Whittier. And this is what he asks. He's kind of philosophizing his thinking. For while we may well thank God and congratulate one another on the prospect of a speedy emancipation of the slaves of the United States, we must not for a moment forget that from this hour, new and mighty responsibilities devolve upon us to aid, direct, and educate these millions left free indeed, but bewildered, ignorant, naked, and foodless in the wild chaos of civil war. When I ask my students about this quote and ask them to just think about what this quote is saying, it puts in their mind this idea, and it should put in your mind, that 4 million people, 4.5 million people, are now free. And where will they go? Where will they go? The population of the United States is only about 30 million. 30 million people. 30 million people, and about 1/6 of them were slaves, and they all now go free. So 1 out of every 6 people had been a slave, and now they all go free. Where did they go? They can't read. There's laws against them learning how to read. They cannot write. Laws against them knowing how to write. They have no education. The only thing they know how to do is to work in a field or physical, manual, hard work. And so many of them, they stay on the plantation, and many of them, continue to work for the farmer that they had worked for, and now they just get paid a very little bit amount of money. So Reconstruction is a very difficult thing. And so here's your question. Here's another question for you. How would you do it? How would you go about actually getting the people in the South, the Confederacy, to want to be part of the United States again? Because Reconstruction isn't just building new buildings, it's also changing how people think. Because in the South, people did not like black people. They were racist. And you can't say, oh, the war's over, now I'm not racist. It didn't work like that. You've been beaten in a war by an enemy. You're probably ever stronger in your racist feelings and your hatred for the United States. And so it's a very difficult thing. So how would you do it? How would you help the freed slaves? And whose job is it? Is it Congress's job or the president? And how would we even know that if it's Congress's job or the president? Well, look at the next slide, and we have the answer. Admitting new states. The Constitution of the United States says this in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 1. It says new states, and read it with me. New states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state. And we don't have to read any further, because that first line, new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, tells us everything we need to know. It tells us that we have Congress whose job it is to admit new states. Now, here's the question. Is Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and North and South Carolina and Florida and Virginia and Texas, are these new states? Well, Lincoln said they weren't. Congress said they were, because both of them wanted to control the Reconstruction. What would that look like? So Lincoln's philosophy, if you look at the next slide, it says Lincoln's Reconstruction. Lincoln's philosophy was, with malice toward none. Lincoln's idea was that we're going to be as forgiving as we can be, because these are our countrymen. These people, they're not new states. They're not new states. They were misled by rebels, by rebellious individuals. They're not actually, they don't really want to separate from the United States. That was Lincoln's belief. Of course, Lincoln died before the war was over, and so his Reconstruction plan did not get very much time. On the next slide, we see Congressional Reconstruction. And the Congressional Reconstruction were the philosophy was, the states have left the Union. They were treasonous. They became disorganized communities, and they committed political suicide. They must rejoin, and so therefore they are new states. And that's what Congress wanted, because Congress wanted to be in charge of Reconstruction. They did not want the president to be in charge, because Congress wanted to be so much harder. Congress hated the South at this point. They wanted to be so much harder on the South than Lincoln would have been. Now, who's the president after Lincoln? Go to the next slide. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson's philosophy was this: the Constitution as it is, the Union as it was. Now, what does that even mean? What, Constitution as it is, Union as it was. What does that even mean? So here's what that means. Johnson had been a slave owner. Remember, he's a Democrat from Tennessee. He hates the big plantation owners in the South, and they hate him. But at the same time, because they felt he was a traitor. He had been the vice president of the United States. But at the same time, he'd been a slave owner. He believed, because of the Emancipation Proclamation, that slavery should end. But he didn't believe that there should be any other changes. He didn't believe that black people should be equal to whites. He didn't believe that black people should have the right to vote, or even that they were citizens of the United States. He once said, this is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I'm alive, it'll be a country of white men, meaning white men running the country for white men. And so he was very racist. And so how do you solve this? What is the answer when you have three different plans of Reconstruction, and you have these radical Republicans, is that term you'll see in your book, radical Republicans trying to take control of Reconstruction? And you know, from your readings, you'll know that Congress impeached Andrew Johnson 2 times. They did not like him. And they passed laws to help the African Americans, or freedmen, as we called them. They were freed slaves. They passed laws to help the freedmen, and he rejected those laws. It's called veto. He vetoed those laws. And they voted again, and they had more votes. And this time they had enough votes to go over Johnson's veto. And so they can pass a law that the president didn't even want. And they did that. They did that 15 times. And they vetoed 29 times, and they overrode his vetoes 15 times. And so Andrew Johnson was not a good president. If you were to look up a ranking of the worst presidents in American history, and we've had 46 at this point, 46, yeah. 45 or 46. And if you look up the worst presidents in American history, what you will see is that Andrew Johnson is one of the worst. Buchanan is one of the worst, and that's the president before and after Lincoln. And that's because they didn't do anything to stop slavery and to stop secession, and they were weak. And so what are the changes that happen after Reconstruction and during Reconstruction? We're going to talk about that in the next lesson. So we'll see you guys then. Bye-bye.